Hey everyone, my name is Landon, and today I'm going to share with you the most terrifying experience of my life. Something that happened to me just 6 months ago when I was desperate for work and took a job at a warehouse in Michigan, USA. Before I begin this story, I want to let you know what you're getting into. This isn't just another horror story. This is real. This happened to me. And I'm still dealing with the psychological aftermath of what I witnessed in that place. I notice that about 80% of viewers watching my videos haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy horror stories and real experiences like this one, please hit that subscribe button. Smash the like button if this story gives you chills. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss my uploads. Also, I love hearing from you all. So please comment below and let me know where you're watching this video from. Your engagement means the world to me. Now, let's dive into this nightmare. It was late October 2024. I had just moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan after losing my previous job at a tech startup in California. The money I had saved was running dangerously low, and winter was approaching fast. I needed work. Any work. And I needed it immediately. That's when I saw the job posting on Indeed. Nightfall Logistics was looking for overnight warehouse workers. The pay was surprisingly good. $22 an hour for night shift work, which was almost double what most warehouse jobs in the area were offering. The posting was brief. Almost too brief. But I was in no position to be picky. The application process was strange from the beginning. Instead of the usual online forms and background checks, I received a text message within hours of applying. It simply said, "Report to 4427, Industrial Drive tomorrow at 11 p.m. Ask for Silas. Bring ID and be ready to work." No questions asked. The address led me to an industrial district on the outskirts of the city. A place where the streetlights were few and far between, and the buildings looked like they hadn't seen maintenance in decades. As I drove through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Though I saw no one around, Nightfall Logistics sat at the end of a dead-end street. A massive concrete building with no windows except for few small ones near the roof. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and the only lighting came from a single flickering bulb above the main entrance. My car made an unsettling echo as I pulled into the lot, the sound seeming to bounce off the building's walls for longer than it should have. I sat in my car for a moment, questioning whether I should actually go through with this. The building looked abandoned, but I could see a faint light coming from inside. And I needed this job. I needed the money. So I took a deep breath, grabbed my ID, and walked toward the entrance. The front door was heavy, made of steel, and it groaned loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, I found myself in a small reception area with fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. The walls were bare concrete, and there was no furniture except for a single metal desk where a man sat reading a newspaper. He looked up as I entered, and I immediately felt uncomfortable. He was tall, probably in his 40s, with graying hair and the kind of pale skin that suggested he rarely saw sunlight. His eyes were an unusual light gray color, almost colorless, and when he smiled, it didn't reach those eyes. "You must be Landon," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "I'm Silas, the night supervisor. Right on time. I like that." He stood up and extended his hand. When I shook it, his grip was firm, but his skin was cold, unnaturally cold, like he'd been outside in freezing weather, even though it was a mild autumn evening. "Before we begin your tour," Silas said, reaching into his desk drawer, "there are some rules you need to understand. These aren't suggestions. They're requirements. Break any of these rules, and you'll be terminated immediately. No warnings. No second chances. Do you understand? I nodded, though something in his tone made my stomach tighten. He pulled out a laminated sheet of paper and handed it to me. The title at the top read Nightfall Logistics, Night Shift Protocols, in bold red letters. Read these carefully, Silas instructed. And I mean every word. Your safety and your employment depend on it. The rules were typed in simple black text. But as I read them, I felt a chill run down my spine. Rule 1. Never work alone in sections C through F between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. If you must enter these areas during this time, work in pairs and maintain constant verbal communication. Rule 2. If you hear whistling in the warehouse, do not investigate. Continue your assigned tasks and ignore the sound completely. Rule 3. The service elevator in Section D is not to be used between midnight and 5 a.m. Use the stairs or freight elevators only. Rule 4. If you encounter a woman in a blue uniform asking for help finding the old office, politely tell her you cannot assist and immediately report to supervision. Rule 5. Never enter the break room on the 3rd floor after 3 a.m. If you need rest, use the ground floor break area only. Rule 6. If the lights in any section begin to flicker rapidly, more than once per second, evacuate that area immediately and inform supervision. Rule 7. Do not acknowledge or respond to anyone calling your name unless you can see who is speaking. If you hear your name called from an empty area, report to supervision immediately. Rule 8. The loading dock doors must remain closed and locked between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Do not open them for any reason, regardless of who asks. Rule 9. If you find yourself in an unfamiliar part of the warehouse, do not panic. Retrace your steps exactly and do not explore. The building layout can be confusing at night. Rule 10. If you see a child in the warehouse at any time, do not approach. Contact supervision immediately and maintain your distance. Rule 11. Never use the bathroom on the 2nd floor between 2:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. Plan accordingly. Rule 12. If you smell roses in any area of the warehouse, leave that section immediately and do not return until the scent has completely disappeared. I looked up at Silas, my hands slightly trembling as I held the paper. These rules, they're necessary, he interrupted, his gray eyes fixed on mine. Nightfall Logistics has been operating for over 30 years. These protocols exist because of experience. Follow them exactly, and you'll have no problems. Ignore them. He paused, his smile fading completely. And you'll understand why the turnover rate is so high. Has anyone ever, I started to ask, broken the rules? Silas finished. Yes, some ignore them because they think they're silly. Others break them accidentally because they don't take them seriously enough. None of those employees work here anymore. And before you ask, no, I won't elaborate on what happens. You'll have to trust that these rules exist for very good reasons. He stood up and gestured toward a door behind his desk. Come on, let's get you oriented. Your shift starts in 15 minutes. And I want to introduce you to your teammates. We walked through the door into the main warehouse space, and I was immediately struck by the sheer size of the building. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, supported by massive steel beams. Rows upon rows of industrial shelving extended in every direction, creating a maze of corridors that seemed to go on forever. The air was thick and musty, with an underlying smell I couldn't identify, something sweet and cloying that made me slightly nauseous. The warehouse is divided into 6 sections, Silas explained as we walked, our footsteps echoing in the vast space. A and B are closest to the main entrance. That's where most of your work will be. C through F are deeper in the building. Older sections, they require special attention, which is why we have those rules. As we moved through Section A, I noticed that the lighting was inconsistent. Some areas were brightly lit with modern LED fixtures, while others relied on old fluorescent tubes that cast sickly yellow pools of light. The contrast created deep shadows between the shelving units, and I found myself unconsciously staying closer to Silas as we walked. "What kind of inventory do you store here?" I asked, noticing that most of the boxes and containers were unmarked or had labels I couldn't read in the dim light. Silas glanced at me. "Various items for various clients. Our job isn't to ask questions about the inventory. Our job is to move it where it needs to go. The less you know about what we're handling, the better you'll sleep during the day." We reached a small office area in Section B, where I met the rest of the night crew. There were 4 other people working the shift, and their reactions to meeting me were unsettling. Madison was a woman in her 30s, with short brown hair and tired eyes. When Silas introduced me, she looked me up and down and simply said, "Another one, huh? Well, good luck. Hope you last longer than the previous guy." Elias was older, probably in his 50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd been doing manual labor his whole life. He shook my hand and leaned in close. "Kid, you read those rules real careful, and you follow them. Every single one. Don't matter how stupid they seem. Don't matter if nothing happens the first few nights. You follow those rules like your life depends on it. Because it might." Chloe was younger, maybe mid-20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She seemed nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder as we talked. "How many people have quit since I started here?" she asked Silas. 4, 5. "Personnel changes are normal in any business," Silas replied curtly. "Landon will be fine as long as he follows protocol." The 4th team member was Dorian, a quiet man who barely looked up from his clipboard when we were introduced. He had dark circles under his eyes and moved with the careful deliberation of someone who was always watching, always listening. "Your primary responsibility," Silas continued, handing me a clipboard and scanner, "will be inventory verification in Sections A and B. Check the items against these lists, scan the barcodes, and update the counts in the system. Simple work, but it needs to be accurate, and it needs to be completed by 6 a.m. He showed me how to use the scanning system and explained the basic layout of my assigned sections. The work seemed straightforward enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching me, waiting to see how I'd react to something. "I'll leave you to get started," Silas said, checking his watch. "Remember, if you have any questions or encounter anything unusual, find me immediately. I'll be in the office until 3 a.m. After that, Madison is your point of contact. And Landon," he placed a hand on my shoulder, and again I was struck by how cold his touch was. "Trust the rules, even when they don't make sense. Especially when they don't make sense." With that, he walked away, leaving me alone with my clipboard and a growing sense of unease. I spent the first hour getting familiar with my assigned area, scanning items and updating counts. The work was monotonous, but I was grateful for the steady rhythm. It kept my mind occupied and helped me ignore the strange atmosphere of the place. The warehouse was far from silent. Even late at night, there were constant sounds. The hum of ventilation systems, the distant rumble of machinery, the occasional clank of metal. But underneath these normal industrial noises, there were other sounds. Sounds that didn't quite fit. soft scraping noises from empty aisles, the occasional thud that seemed to come from the upper levels. And once, what sounded like footsteps running across the roof. Around 1 a.m., I was working in a particularly dark corner of Section A when I heard it for the first time. Whistling. It was soft, almost melodic, coming from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. The tune was familiar, something I'd heard before, but I couldn't place it. I remembered Rule 2 immediately. If you hear whistling in the warehouse, do not investigate. Continue your assigned tasks and ignore the sound completely. I forced myself to keep scanning items, but the whistling continued, growing slightly louder, and I realized the tune was "Mary Had a Little Lamb," played slowly, with long pauses between notes. It should have been innocent, childlike, but something about hearing it in that dark warehouse at 1 a.m. made my skin crawl. The whistling lasted for about 5 minutes, then stopped abruptly, leaving only the usual industrial sounds. I was sweating despite the cool air, and my hands were shaking slightly as I continued my work. Around 1:30 a.m., Madison appeared at the end of my aisle, startling me. "You heard it too," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "The whistling?" I asked. She nodded. "It's been happening more frequently lately. Used to be maybe once a week. Now it's almost every night." "Did you investigate?" "No. I followed the rules." "Good," she said, relief evident in her voice. "The last guy who worked your position, he didn't listen. First night, he heard the whistling and went looking for it. Found him the next morning in Section A, just standing there, staring at the wall. Wouldn't respond to anyone. Wouldn't move. Had to call an ambulance. He never came back to work." "What was wrong with him?" I asked. Madison shrugged. "Doctors said it was some kind of catatonic state, but he recovered after a few days. Problem was, he couldn't remember anything about that night. Not the job. Not the warehouse. Not even his own name for a while. Brain just wiped clean." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Landon, you seem like a decent guy. Take my advice. Don't get curious about anything in this place. Curiosity killed more than just cats around here." The next hour passed without incident, but as 2 a.m. approached, I found myself constantly checking the time. Rule 1 specifically mentioned the time period between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., and I was supposed to avoid working alone in sections C through F during those hours. At exactly 2 a.m., I was finishing up a count in Section A when I noticed something strange. The lighting in the corridor leading to Section C had changed. Instead of the usual fluorescent glow, there was a softer, warmer light, almost like candlelight, flickering gently. I stood there for a moment, staring down the corridor. The warm light was actually quite beautiful, inviting even, a stark contrast to the harsh industrial lighting everywhere else. Without thinking, I started walking toward it. I had made it about halfway down the corridor when I suddenly remembered the rule. Never work alone in sections C through F between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I stopped dead in my tracks, realizing that I was being drawn towards Section C. Alone, at exactly the time the rules warned against, but the light was so warm, so welcoming, and I could smell something pleasant drifting from that direction. Roses, sweet roses. Rule 12 suddenly flashed in my mind. If you smell roses in any area of the warehouse, leave that section immediately and do not return until the scent has completely disappeared. I turned around and walked quickly back to Section A, my heart pounding. As I reached the main aisle, I looked back toward Section C. The warm light was gone, replaced by the normal harsh fluorescence, and the smell of roses had vanished completely. I spent the rest of the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. period working exclusively in sections A and B, staying well away from the deeper parts of the warehouse. But I couldn't stop thinking about that warm light, and wondering what I might have found if I had continued walking toward it. Around 3 a.m., I was taking a short break near the main office when I saw Chloe approaching, looking more nervous than usual. "Have you seen Dorian?" she asked, glancing around anxiously. "Not since the beginning of the shift," I replied. "Why?" "He was supposed to be working in Section B, but I can't find him anywhere. And he's not answering his radio." We both stood there for a moment, listening. The warehouse seemed quieter than usual. Even the constant industrial humming had diminished. "Maybe he's in the bathroom?" I suggested. Chloe shook her head. "I already checked. Both floors. He's just gone." "Should we look for him?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. Rule 7. Don't go looking for people. If someone's missing, we report to supervision. But Silas said he'd be gone after 3 a.m., and Madison is the contact after that. I can't find her either." We stood there in the growing silence, and I began to understand why the turnover rate was so high. People didn't quit this job. They just disappeared. "There," Chloe said suddenly, pointing toward Section D. "I can see a light moving around. That has to be someone." I squinted in the direction she was pointing and could indeed see a faint light moving between the shelves, like someone carrying a flashlight. "Should we check it out?" I asked. Chloe was already shaking her head. Rule 9. If you find yourself in an unfamiliar part of the warehouse, don't explore. And we're not supposed to be working alone in the deep sections anyway. The light continued moving for several more minutes, then disappeared. We never did find Dorian that night. When Silas returned at 5 a.m., he simply noted Dorian's absence on his clipboard and said he'd handle the situation. The rest of my first shift passed without major incident, though I noticed that the normal sounds of the warehouse had returned around 4 a.m., as if the building itself had been holding its breath during those 2 hours. When 6 a.m. arrived, I was exhausted, not just from the work, but from the constant tension, the feeling of being watched, the need to remember and follow all those strange rules. Silas gathered the remaining team members, myself, Madison, and Chloe, and gave us our assignments for the following night. "Dorian won't be returning," he said matter-of-factly. "We'll be operating with reduced staff until we can find a replacement. Landon, you'll be taking over some of Dorian's responsibilities in Section C." My stomach dropped. Section C? But the rules say you can't work alone in Sections C through F between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., Silas corrected. "You'll be working with Madison during those hours. The rest of the time, you'll be fine on your own, assuming you follow the protocols." I wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but I needed this job, and Silas's gray eyes made it clear that arguing wasn't an option. I drove home that morning as the sun was rising, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every time I checked my rearview mirror, the road behind me was empty, but the feeling persisted. It wasn't until I was safely inside my apartment with the door locked that I finally began to relax. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that warm, flickering light from Section C, and smelled those roses. I found myself wondering what would have happened if I had kept walking, what I might have discovered in the deeper parts of the warehouse. By the time evening came, I had almost convinced myself to quit, to find another job, any other job. But $22 an hour was more than I'd made in years. And winter was coming. I needed the money. So I returned to Nightfall Logistics for my second night, telling myself I'd be more careful, more prepared. I should have trusted my instincts and stayed home. My second night started much like the first. Silas briefed me on my expanded responsibilities, reminded me of the rules, and introduced me to the new dynamic now that we were down a team member. The atmosphere seemed even more tense than the previous night, if that was possible. Madison pulled me aside as we prepared to start our shifts. Listen, working in Section C isn't like working in A and B. The deeper you go into this building, the stranger things get. Stick close to me during the danger hours. And whatever you do, don't go exploring on your own. What happened to Dorian? I asked. She looked around nervously before answering. Officially, he quit without notice. Unofficially, I think he broke one of the rules. Probably wandered off during the restricted hours. This place, it has a way of making people disappear when they don't follow the protocols. Disappear how? I pressed. Some people just vanish, like they never existed. Others turn up, changed, wrong somehow, and a few. Well, let's just say the ambulance visits are more common than Silas likes to admit. The first few hours of the shift went smoothly. I worked in Section A and B until about 1:30 a.m., then met up with Madison to begin our work in Section C. The transition from the outer sections to Section C was immediately noticeable. The air grew thicker, more oppressive, and the lighting became more inconsistent. Section C felt older than the rest of the building. The concrete floors were more cracked. The shelving units looked like they'd been installed decades ago, and everything was covered in a fine layer of dust that seemed to resettle no matter how often it was disturbed. This section doesn't get much traffic during the day, Madison explained as we walked through the aisles, our footsteps echoing strangely. Most of the inventory back here hasn't been moved in years, maybe decades. Sometimes I wonder if Nightfall Logistics just uses these areas as storage for things they want to forget about. We began our work, checking inventory and scanning barcodes. But the items in Section C were different from those in the outer sections. Many of the boxes were unmarked or had labels in languages I didn't recognize. Some were sealed with what looked like wax rather than tape, and a few had symbols instead of words. Strange symbols that seemed to shift and change when I looked at them directly. Don't stare at the markings, Madison warned, noticing my fascination. Some of these containers. It's better not to think too hard about what might be inside them. Around 2:15 a.m., we were working at opposite ends of a long aisle when I heard Madison call out, "Landon, can you come help me with something?" I looked up from my clipboard and could see her silhouette about 50 feet away, standing near a stack of tall boxes. "What do you need?" I called back. "Just come here. I can't move this by myself." I started walking toward her. But something felt wrong. Her voice had sounded strange, distant, almost like an echo. As I got closer, I realized that the figure I was approaching didn't quite look like Madison. The proportions were off. The silhouette was too tall, too thin. Rule 7 flashed in my mind. Do not acknowledge or respond to anyone calling your name unless you can see who is speaking. If you hear your name called from an empty area, report to supervision immediately. I stopped walking and called out, "Madison, where are you exactly?" "Right here," came the reply. But now the voice was coming from behind me. I turned around and saw Madison approaching from the direction I had just come from. carrying her scanner and looking confused. "Did you call me?" I asked. "No, I've been working 3 aisles over." "Why?" I looked back toward where I had been walking. The tall figure was gone. Someone called my name, told me to come help. But it wasn't you. Madison's face went pale. "Show me exactly where you heard from." We walked to the spot where I had seen the figure. There was nothing there but empty floor and undisturbed dust. But as we stood there, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the dust. Large footprints, much larger than either Madison's or mine, leading from where the figure had been, standing deeper into Section C, toward the areas we were forbidden to enter alone. "We need to get out of here," Madison whispered. Now, we quickly gathered our equipment and moved back towards Section B. As we walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the aisles behind us remained empty. At least, I hoped they were empty. We spent the remainder of the danger hours working exclusively in Section B, neither of us willing to venture back into Section C until after 4 a.m., when we finally did return to complete our assigned tasks. The atmosphere felt different, less oppressive, as if whatever had been lurking in those aisles had moved on. But the footprints were still there, and they led deeper into the warehouse than either of us was authorized to go. The next few nights followed a similar pattern. Strange sounds, unexplained phenomena, and the constant feeling of being watched. I began to understand why the rules existed, and why following them was so important. Each night brought new challenges, new tests of my ability to resist curiosity and follow the protocols. On my 5th night, I encountered the woman in the blue uniform. I was working alone in Section A around 11:30 p.m. when she appeared at the end of my aisle. She looked to be in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a bun, wearing what appeared to be an old-style uniform, like something a secretary might have worn in the 1980s. The uniform was a faded blue color, and she carried a manila folder in her hands. "Excuse me," she said, her voice pleasant but somehow off, like a recording played at slightly the wrong speed. "I'm looking for the old office. The main office used to be back here somewhere, but I can't seem to find it." Rule 4 immediately came to mind. If you encounter a woman in a blue uniform asking for help finding the old office, politely tell her you cannot assist and immediately report to supervision. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't help you with that. I'm new here and don't know the building layout very well." She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Are you sure? It's very important that I find it. I have some papers that need to be filed, and they're already quite overdue." "I really can't help," I repeated, backing away slowly. "You might want to check with supervision." Her smile faltered, and for just a moment, her face seemed to flicker, like a bad television signal. "These papers are very important," she said again, her voice taking on a more insistent tone. "Surely you can spare a few minutes to help me look." I continued backing away. "I'm sorry. I have work to do." She watched me for a moment longer, then sighed. "Very well. I suppose I'll have to keep looking on my own. Thank you anyway." She turned and walked away, disappearing around a corner. I immediately radioed Silas to report the encounter, as the rules required. When I found him in his office, he listened to my description and nodded grimly. "You handled that perfectly," he said, making notes on his clipboard. "What did she look like?" I described the woman in detail, and Silas's expression grew more serious as I spoke. "Landon, that woman died in this building in 1987. She was the night office manager. Worked here for 15 years. One night, she stayed late to catch up on filing, and she was found the next morning, dead at her desk. Heart attack. Apparently, my blood went cold. You're saying I just talked to a ghost? Silas shrugged. I'm saying you encountered something that looks like Patricia Holloway, and you followed the rules, which probably saved your life. Others who've tried to help her, well, they tend to get lost. Sometimes they're found days later. Sometimes not at all. But they're never the same when they come back. Why does she keep looking for the old office? I asked. Because she died trying to file those papers, Silas explained. And now she's trapped. Doomed to keep looking for an office that was demolished 20 years ago. The building's been renovated and expanded several times since 1987. But she doesn't understand that. In her mind, it's still 1987. And she still has work to do. I left his office feeling shaken. The idea that I had been talking to the ghost of a dead woman was disturbing enough. But the fact that Silas discussed it so matter-of-factly, as if supernatural encounters were just part of the job, was even more unsettling. By my second week at Nightfall Logistics, I had encountered most of the phenomena mentioned in the rules. I had heard the whistling multiple times, always managing to resist the urge to investigate. I had seen the flickering lights that preceded evacuations. I had smelled the roses and immediately left the area. And I had learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. But it was on my 10th night that I made the mistake that nearly cost me everything. I was working in Section C with Madison during the danger hours. Around 2:30 a.m., when nature called, I needed to use the bathroom. And badly. The nearest bathroom was on the second floor. But Rule 11 clearly stated that the second-floor bathroom was off-limits between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. I checked my watch. 2:32 a.m. I had almost an hour to wait. But I really couldn't hold it that long. The alternative was to go to the ground-floor bathroom. But that would require leaving Section C, walking through several other sections, and potentially leaving Madison alone, which violated Rule 1. I was faced with a choice. Break Rule 11 and use the second-floor bathroom. Or break Rule 1 and leave Madison alone. I made the wrong choice. I'll be right back, I told Madison. Just need to use the bathroom real quick. Use the one downstairs, she replied without looking up from her inventory. That's too far. I'll just run up to the second floor. Be back in 5 minutes. Madison looked up then, her face filled with alarm. Landon, no, it's 2:30. You can't use that bathroom for another hour. It'll be fine, I said, already heading toward the stairwell. It's just a bathroom. What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words. The stairwell to the second floor was dimly lit, with only every third bulb working. My footsteps echoed as I climbed, the sound seeming to multiply and bounce off the walls, creating the illusion that several people were walking up the stairs with me. The second floor was darker than the ground level, with most of the area unused and unlit. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate the corridors, looking for the bathroom. The air up here felt different, thicker, and there was a smell I couldn't identify, something organic and unpleasant. I found the bathroom at the end of a long hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and no light was visible inside. I pushed the door open and felt around for a light switch. When I found it and flicked it on, the fluorescent bulbs flickered for a moment before providing weak, unstable illumination. The bathroom was small, with 2 stalls and a single sink. Everything looked normal enough, though there was a persistent dripping sound coming from somewhere I couldn't locate. I entered the nearest stall, relieved to finally take care of business. It was while I was in the stall that I heard the door to the bathroom open. Footsteps echoed on the tile floor. Slow, deliberate steps. I assumed it was Madison, coming to check on me. "I'll be right out," I called. No response, but the footsteps continued, moving around the bathroom. I could hear them clearly. The distinctive sound of shoes on wet tile. But there was something wrong with the rhythm. The steps were too slow, too measured, and they seemed to be circling the small room. "Madison," I called again. Still no response, but now I could hear something else. A soft humming. The tune was familiar. It was the same melody I had heard whistled that first night. "Mary Had a Little Lamb," but played slowly, mournfully. My blood ran cold as I realized that someone, or something, was in the bathroom with me, humming that cursed tune. And it wasn't Madison. I quickly finished up and prepared to leave the stall. But as I reached for the door handle, the humming stopped, and the footsteps ceased. The bathroom had gone completely silent except for that persistent dripping. I stood there for a moment, hand on the stall door, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct told me to stay put, to wait until whatever was out there went away. But I knew I couldn't stay in that bathroom forever. And Madison was waiting for me in Section C. I slowly opened the stall door and peered out. The bathroom appeared empty. But something was wrong. The fluorescent lights were flickering rapidly now, more than once per second, which according to Rule 6 meant I should evacuate immediately. But as I stepped out of the stall, I saw her. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in front of the sinks. She had long dark hair that hung down over her face, and she was wearing what looked like a nightgown, white but stained with something dark. Her bare feet were dirty, and she was so pale she almost seemed to glow in the flickering light. Rule 10 flashed through my mind. If you see a child in the warehouse at any time, do not approach. Contact supervision immediately and maintain your distance. But something about this child was different. Wrong. She wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. She just stood there, perfectly still, like a statue. I tried to back away toward the door, but my legs felt heavy, as if I was walking through thick mud. The little girl slowly raised her head, and I saw her face. Her eyes were completely black, not just the iris, but the entire eye, like 2 dark holes in her pale face. No whites, no pupils, just endless darkness that seemed to pull at my vision. And then she smiled. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Her lips stretched impossibly wide, revealing teeth that were too sharp. Too many, like a shark's mouth in a child's face. The smile kept growing, stretching beyond what any human face should be capable of. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. The air in the bathroom had become thick, suffocating, and that dripping sound was getting louder, faster, like a heartbeat. The little girl tilted her head at an unnatural angle, her neck bending in a way that would break a normal person's spine. And she began to speak. But the voice that came out wasn't a child's voice. It was deep, gravelly, like an old man who had been smoking for decades. "Why are you here?" she asked, taking a step toward me. "This isn't your time. This isn't your place." I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't obey. The fluorescent lights were flickering so rapidly now that they were creating a strobe effect, making the little girl's movements appear jerky, unnatural. like frames missing from an old film reel. You broke the rules, she continued, her impossibly wide smile never wavering. You came here when you shouldn't have. Now you have to pay. She raised her hand, and I could see that her fingers were too long, with joints in places where joints shouldn't be. Her nails were black and curved like claws, and as she reached toward me, I could smell something putrid, like rotting meat. That's when my paralysis finally broke. I spun around and ran for the door, crashing through it and into the hallway. Behind me, I could hear laughter, high-pitched and maniacal, echoing through the bathroom and following me down the corridor. I ran to the stairwell and took the steps 3 at a time, not caring about the noise I was making. My only thought was to get as far away from that bathroom as possible. When I reached the ground floor, I didn't stop running until I found Madison in Section C. She took one look at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she demanded. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I used the second-floor bathroom," I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. Madison's face went white. "Oh no, Landon, what did you see?" I told her everything. About the footsteps, the humming, the little girl with the black eyes and impossible smile. Madison listened in growing horror, occasionally glancing toward the stairwell as if expecting something to follow me down. "We need to find Silas," she said when I finished. Right now, we found Silas in his office, doing paperwork. When we told him what had happened, his reaction was immediate and severe. "Show me your arms," he commanded. "What?" I asked, confused. "Your arms. Show me." I rolled up my sleeves, and Silas examined my forearms carefully, looking for something. After a moment, he seemed to relax slightly. "No marks. That's good. You might be okay." "What marks?" I asked. "What are you looking for?" Silas sat back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. "The child you encountered. She's been in this building for a very long time. Longer than any of us have been working here. She marks people who break the rules, scratches them, and once you're marked, you belong to her." "What does that mean?" Madison asked. "It means you become part of this place. Permanently, your body might keep working, might keep moving around, but your mind, your soul, that belongs to her." I felt sick. "What is she?" Silas shrugged. "I don't know, and I don't want to know. What I do know is that she's the reason Rule 10 exists. And she's the reason several employees have disappeared over the years. You're lucky she didn't touch you. Very lucky." "Why didn't she?" I asked. "She was reaching for me. But then I was suddenly able to move." Silas thought for a moment. "Maybe because you didn't approach her. Rule 10 says don't approach. You kept your distance. Even when you were frozen, you didn't go toward her. That might have saved you." The rest of that night passed in a blur. I was too shaken to focus on work, jumping at every sound, constantly looking over my shoulder. Madison stayed close to me, clearly worried that I might have been affected in some way by the encounter. When the shift ended at 6 a.m., Silas pulled me aside. "Landon, I need to ask you a direct question, and I need an honest answer. Do you feel different in any way? Any urges to go places you shouldn't? Any voices in your head? Any desire to break the rules?" I considered the question carefully. Did I feel different? There was definitely something, a persistent thought in the back of my mind, an urge to return to that bathroom, to see if the little girl was still there. But I assumed that was normal curiosity, not supernatural influence. I keep thinking about going back, I admitted. But I think that's just because I'm scared. Not because something is compelling me. Silas studied my face carefully. The fact that you can recognize and resist the urge is a good sign. But I want you to take the next 2 nights off. Paid leave. Stay away from this place and see how you feel. If the urges get stronger, if you start having dreams about the little girl, call me immediately. I was grateful for the break. The encounter had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. And the idea of returning to that building, of working through another night shift, filled me with dread. I spent the next 2 days trying to forget about nightfall logistics, about the rules, about the little girl in the bathroom. I caught up on sleep, watched movies, even went out to dinner with some friends I hadn't seen since moving to Grand Rapids. For brief moments, I almost felt normal again. But the dream started on the second night. I dreamed I was back in the warehouse. But it was different. Older, darker. The shelving units were gone, replaced by long corridors lined with doors. And behind each door, I could hear sounds. Crying, screaming, laughter. And at the end of each corridor, the little girl was waiting, smiling that impossible smile, beckoning me forward. In the dreams, I always walked toward her, unable to resist. And when I got close enough, she would reach out with those long, jointed fingers and touch my arm. The moment she touched me, I would feel something cold spreading through my body, like ice water in my veins. And I would know that I belonged to her now, that I would never leave this place. I woke up each time in a cold sweat, the phantom sensation of her touch still burning on my arm. And each morning, I found myself thinking more and more about returning to the warehouse. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to, like something was calling me back. By the 3rd day, the urges were becoming stronger. I would find myself driving in the direction of nightfall logistics without realizing it, having to consciously turn around and go home. I called Silas and told him about the dreams, about the growing compulsion to return. "Come in tonight," he said, "but not for your regular shift. Come in at 10 p.m., before the night crew starts. I want to try something." When I arrived at the warehouse at 10 p.m., Silas was waiting for me in the parking lot. He wasn't alone. There was an older woman with him, probably in her 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes. She was carrying a small leather bag. "Landon, this is Margaret," Silas said. "She's a specialist." In these kinds of situations, Margaret stepped forward and took my hands in hers. Her touch was warm, comfort, the opposite of the cold sensation I remembered from my dreams. "You've been marked," she said simply. "Not physically, but spiritually. The entity you encountered has placed a claim on you. If we don't break that connection, you'll be drawn back here until you give into it." "How do we break it?" I asked. Margaret opened her leather bag and pulled out several items. Candles, small bottles of what looked like oil or water, and a piece of chalk. "We need to go to the place where the encounter happened, face the entity directly, and sever the connection." The thought of returning to that bathroom filled me with terror. But the alternative, being slowly drawn back to this place until I became another missing employee, was even worse. We entered the building together, Margaret leading the way, Silas following close behind. The warehouse felt different at this hour. Before the night shift began, it was quieter, but also more oppressive, as if the building itself was holding its breath. We climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, and I could feel my anxiety growing with each step. The compulsion to return was stronger here, and I found myself walking faster, eager to reach the bathroom. Margaret noticed my change in behavior and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Fight it," she said firmly. "Don't let it control you." When we reached the bathroom door, Margaret stopped and began arranging her materials. She drew symbols on the floor with chalk, lit candles and placed them at specific points, and opened one of the bottles, releasing the smell of sage and something else I couldn't identify. "Landon, I need you to enter the bathroom," she said, "but stay in the doorway. Don't go any further than necessary." I approached the door with Silas and Margaret flanking me. My heart was pounding, and every instinct told me to run, but I forced myself to push the door open. The bathroom looked exactly as I had left it 3 nights ago. Empty, dimly lit, with that persistent dripping sound. But as soon as I stepped into the doorway, the temperature dropped noticeably, and I could see my breath in the suddenly frigid air. "She's here," Margaret whispered. I can feel her presence. The little girl materialized slowly, like a photograph developing. She appeared first as a faint outline, then gradually became more solid, more real. She was standing in the same spot as before, in front of the sinks, wearing the same stained nightgown. But this time, her head was already tilted at that unnatural angle, and her black eyes were fixed directly on me. "You came back," she said in that gravelly, adult voice. "I knew you would. They always come back." Margaret stepped forward, positioning herself between me and the entity. "You have no claim on this man," she said in a strong, clear voice. "He has broken no covenant with you, made no bargain. You will release him." The little girl's impossible smile widened. "He broke the rules. He came to my place during my time. That makes him mine. The rules are protections, not contracts," Margaret replied. "Breaking them doesn't give you ownership. And this man didn't approach you, didn't accept anything from you. You have no legitimate claim." The entity's expression changed, the smile fading to a snarl. "He dreamed of me. He thought of me. He wanted to return. That is acceptance enough." Margaret began speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Latin, maybe, or something older. The candles around us flared brighter, and the chalk symbols on the floor began to glow with a soft white light. The little girl shrieked, a sound like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the cry of a dying animal. She raised her hands, those long, jointed fingers extended toward me, but she couldn't seem to move closer, as if an invisible barrier was preventing her approach. "You will release him," Margaret commanded, her voice echoing strangely in the small space. "By the authority of light over darkness, of life over death, of free will over compulsion. You will release him now." The entity writhed, her form becoming less solid, more transparent. "He is mine," she hissed. "Mine by right of trespass. Mine by right of fear." "He is his own," Margaret replied, "and he chooses to leave. Release him." There was a moment of terrible silence. Then the little girl let out another shriek, this one so loud and piercing that I had to cover my ears. The fluorescent lights exploded in showers of sparks, plunging the bathroom into darkness except for the glow of Margaret's candles. When the echoes faded, the little girl was gone. The oppressive cold lifted immediately, replaced by normal, comfortable air, and most importantly, the compulsion I had been feeling, the desperate need to return to this place, vanished completely. "It's done," Margaret said, beginning to pack up her materials. "The connection is severed. She can't call to you anymore. We left the bathroom and made our way back downstairs. I felt lighter, freer than I had since the night I first encountered the entity. The warehouse still felt strange, still felt dangerous, but it no longer felt like it had a claim on me. Will she bother anyone else? I asked as we reached the main floor. Margaret shook her head. She's bound to that bathroom, to that specific space and time. As long as people follow Rule 11 and avoid that area during the danger hours, they should be safe. But Landon, she turned to face me, her expression serious. You can never work here again. Ever. Even though the connection is broken. You'll always be more vulnerable to her than others. If you encounter her again, she might be able to reestablish the claim. Silas nodded in agreement. I'll have your final paycheck ready by tomorrow. You've earned it. Few people survive a direct encounter with her, and fewer still come back to face her again. I left Nightfall Logistics that night knowing I would never return. And honestly, despite the good pay, I was relieved. The money wasn't worth the constant fear, the sleepless days, the knowledge that I was working in a place where supernatural entities roamed the halls. But my time at that warehouse changed me in ways I didn't expect. For weeks afterward, I found myself more aware of my surroundings, more attuned to the subtle signs that something wasn't right. I started noticing things I had previously overlooked. Strange sounds, unusual shadows, the feeling of being watched. It was about a month after leaving Nightfall Logistics that I realized this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I was working a new job, a much more normal job at a shipping company, when I encountered something that made me grateful for everything I had learned at the warehouse. I was working a late shift. Not as late as Nightfall Logistics, but late enough that the building was mostly empty. It was around 9 p.m. when I started hearing footsteps in the upper floor offices. Slow, deliberate steps, just like the ones I had heard in that bathroom. Most people would have ignored it, assumed it was a co-worker staying late, or maybe building settling noises. But my time at Nightfall Logistics had taught me to trust my instincts. And my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I investigated carefully, staying alert, ready to run if necessary. What I found was a break-in in progress. Someone had entered through an upper floor window and was trying to crack the office safe. If I hadn't been attuned to those subtle warnings, if I hadn't learned to pay attention to unusual sounds, the company might have lost thousands of dollars in cash and important documents. The police caught the burglar, and I was commended for my alertness. My new boss even gave me a raise, saying that my exceptional awareness was exactly the kind of quality they valued in their security-minded employees. So in a strange way, my terrifying experience at Nightfall Logistics had made me better at my new job, more valuable as an employee. It had taught me to pay attention, to trust my instincts, and to never ignore the signs when something isn't right. But I still have nightmares sometimes. Dreams where I'm back in that warehouse, walking through those dark aisles, hearing the whistling in the distance, smelling roses where there should be none. And sometimes, in the worst dreams, I'm back in that bathroom, facing the little girl with the black eyes and impossible smile. In those dreams, Margaret isn't there to save me. Silas isn't there to explain the rules. I'm alone, defenseless, and the little girl's long, jointed fingers are reaching for my arm, ready to mark me, to claim me, to make me part of that dark place forever. I wake up from these dreams in a cold sweat, my heart racing, but I remind myself that it's over, that the connection was severed, that I'm safe as long as I stay away from that place. And gradually, my heartbeat slows, my breathing returns to normal, and I can go back to sleep. But I've learned something important from this experience. There are places in this world where the normal rules don't apply. Places where things exist that shouldn't exist. Where the line between the living and the dead, between the natural and the supernatural, becomes blurred. Nightfall logistics is one of those places. And I suspect there are others, hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary businesses, ordinary buildings, places where desperate people go to work, not knowing what they're walking into, not understanding the true cost of that surprisingly good paycheck. If you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, if you ever take a job that seems too good to be true, and they give you a list of strange rules to follow, take those rules seriously. Follow them exactly. No matter how silly they seem, no matter how curious you become, because the consequences of breaking them, the things that wait in the shadows, the entities that hunger for human souls, they're real, and they're patient, and they're always watching for someone to make a mistake. I was lucky. I had Margaret to help break the connection. I had Silas to warn me about the dangers. I had co-workers who understood the importance of the rules. Not everyone who encounters these things is so fortunate. The warehouse is still there, still operating, still hiring desperate people who need work and aren't too picky about the conditions. Silas is probably still giving the orientation speech, still handing out that laminated sheet of rules, still watching new employees to see who will follow the protocols and who will let curiosity get the better of them. And somewhere in that building, in the deeper sections, in the places where the rules say you shouldn't go, things are waiting. Waiting for someone to break Rule 1 and work alone in the dangerous hours. Waiting for someone to investigate the whistling. Waiting for someone to use that service elevator. Or enter that break room. Or approach the woman in the blue uniform. They're patient. These things, they have all the time in the world. And eventually, someone will break the rules. Someone will give in to curiosity, or desperation, or simple human error. And when they do, those things will be ready. The little girl in the bathroom is still there too, waiting for the next person to ignore Rule 11, the next person who thinks they can't wait an hour to use the facilities, the next person who decides that surely, just this once, breaking one little rule won't matter. She's patient too. After all, she's been waiting since 1987. What's a few more years? A few more decades? Timing's nothing to the dead. They can afford to wait for the perfect moment. The perfect victim. The perfect opportunity to add another soul to their collection. So if you ever find yourself in Grand Rapids, Michigan, driving through the industrial district late at night, and you see a sign for Nightfall Logistics, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't apply for a job. No matter how desperate you are. No matter how good the pay seems. It's not worth it. Trust me on this. Because some jobs cost more than money. Some workplaces demand more than your time and effort. They want your soul. Your sanity. Your very existence. And once they have a claim on you, once you've broken their rules and given them an opening, it's almost impossible to escape. I was one of the lucky ones. I got out. I survived, but I carry the scars with me. The memories, the knowledge that there are things in this world that shouldn't exist, but do, things that hunger for human souls, and will stop at nothing to claim them. So remember what I've told you. Trust your instincts. Follow the rules, whatever they are, wherever you find them, because they're not suggestions. They're not guidelines. They're not arbitrary restrictions imposed by paranoid managers. They're the only thing standing between you and the darkness that waits in the shadows. The only protection you have against things that view human beings as nothing more than prey. And if you ever find yourself in a place like Nightfall Logistics, if you ever encounter entities like the ones I've described, remember this. The rules exist for a reason. Breaking them has consequences. And some consequences are worse than death. Stay safe out there. Trust your instincts. And never, ever, ignore the warning signs when something isn't right. Because in places like Nightfall Logistics, your life, your soul, your very existence might depend on it. The building still stands today, still operates, still hires new employees who don't know what they're walking into, still has that same flickering light above the entrance, the same cracked parking lot, the same steel door that groans when you open it. And inside, Silas still sits at his metal desk, reading his newspaper, waiting for the next desperate person to walk through that door. The rules haven't changed. The dangers haven't diminished. If anything, they've grown stronger, more cunning, more patient, learning from each encounter, adapting to each new employee, finding new ways to test the boundaries, to push people toward breaking the protocols that keep them safe. Madison still works there, still partners with new employees during the dangerous hours, still shares warnings about what happens to people who don't take the rules seriously. CHLOE left after I did. Couldn't handle the stress anymore. Last I heard, she moved back home to live with her parents. Still wakes up screaming some nights. Still checks every room before she enters it. Still jumps at unexpected sounds. The warehouse has gone through dozens of employees since I left. Most quit within the first week. Some disappear, never to be seen again. A few, like me, survive long enough to learn the truth about that place. But most of them don't talk about it. Most people wouldn't believe them if they did. But I'm telling you, because I think people need to know, need to understand that there are places in this world where the supernatural bleeds through into reality, where the dead don't rest, where entities that should exist only in nightmares walk among the living. Nightfall Logistics is one of those places. But it's not the only one. There are others, hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary businesses, ordinary buildings, and they're all looking for the same thing. People who are desperate enough, hungry enough, broke enough, to accept a job without asking too many questions. So when you see that job posting that seems too good to be true, when the pay is suspiciously high for simple work, when the application process is rushed and informal, when they give you a list of strange rules to follow, remember my story. Remember what I went through. Remember what I learned. Some jobs aren't worth taking, no matter how much they pay, no matter how desperate you are. Because the true cost isn't measured in time or effort. It's measured in pieces of your soul, in fragments of your sanity, in the slow erosion of your humanity. And once you've paid that price, once you've given them what they want, you can never get it back. The scars remain forever. The memories haunt your dreams. And you're never quite the same person you were before you walk through that steel door. I'm sharing this story not to scare you, though I hope it does, but to warn you, to prepare you, to give you the knowledge you need to recognize these places, these situations, these entities, and to stay away from them, because knowledge is the only protection we have against the darkness. Understanding is the only weapon we possess against things that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, just sometimes, knowing what to look for, knowing what warning signs to watch for, can save your life. Thank you for watching my story, for listening to my experience, for taking the time to learn from my mistakes. I know it's hard to believe. I know it sounds like fiction, like something out of a horror movie. But I swear to you, every word is true. Every detail is exactly as I experienced it. Every rule, every entity, every terrifying moment. All of it happened exactly as I've described. If this story gave you chills, if it made you think twice about taking that too-good-to-be-true job offer, if it made you more aware of the warning signs when something isn't right, then please hit that like button. Share this video with others who might need to hear this warning. And subscribe to my channel for more real experiences like this one. I love hearing from you all. So please comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever worked in a place with strange rules? Have you ever encountered something that couldn't be explained by normal means? Have you ever felt like you were being watched, hunted, claimed by something that shouldn't exist? Share your experiences, your stories, your warnings, because together, we can help protect others from walking into the same traps we escaped. What topic would you like me to cover next? What other real experiences would you like to hear about? Are you interested in more workplace horror stories? Or would you prefer something different? Let me know in the comments. Your suggestions and feedback mean the world to me, and help me decide what stories to share next. And remember, stay safe out there. Trust your instincts. Follow the rules, whatever they are, wherever you find them. Because in this world, there are things that hunger for human souls, and they're always looking for their next victim. Don't let that victim be you. Until next time, keep watching the shadows. Keep listening for the warning signs. And never forget that some doors are meant to stay closed. Some jobs are meant to be refused. And some rules are meant to be followed. No matter how strange they might seem. Subscribe to my channel. Ring that notification bell. And I'll see you in the next terrifying tale. Stay safe. Stay vigilant. And remember, not all workplaces are what they seem.